Thank you for that introduction. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As a fellow at the Institute for Global Engagement, the Center for Women, Faith and Leadership, I'm empowered to advance in leadership roles and decision-making in global affairs, in areas where women are most affected but have the least influence. These areas are peacebuilding, conflict resolution, and religious freedom. And so this forum is quite an interesting one, and I'm grateful to be here to participate. Just to give you a background on my topic on empowering women of faith to combat drug abuse in Mombasa. Mombasa is a second largest city in Kenya, and it's the largest port city in Eastern Africa. Research shows that as regional conflict escalates in Central Asia and enforcement increases in Southeastern Europe, there's emerged what is a new alternative drug route called the smart truck, where drugs are coming all the way from Afghanistan to Mombasa, and then from Mombasa exported to the rest of Europe and America. Now, this explains why 1 gram of heroin, for example, costs $1.90 in Kenya, as opposed to $200 in the United States of America. Now, the biggest challenge here is that Mombasa is instantaneously or rapidly becoming an international heroin transit hub. And as a result, there's high increase of crime rates in Kenya. And we have a lot of people now being infected with drugs, with HIV and AIDS because of the injective drug users. And it's a major problem, and people need to act now before it becomes worse. Women and girls are the most hit by this drug menace, sadly. And the reason why, as a woman of faith, I am empowering women to combat this drug menace. Some of the effects, just to explain that it has been an ongoing problem for decades. So I'll take you back a little bit. In 1991, we had the male students in a boarding school invade the girls' dormitory, and 70 girls were raped, where 19 girls lost their lives at a tender age of 15. A decade that followed, we found that a similar episode occurred, and more girls lost their lives too. And we keep seeing this repetitively, and it's a major concern. We also find that it's now being documented that most people are succumbing to HIV and AIDS through individual, injecting drug users. So because of sharing the needle and syringe, this has become a main source of, spreading the disease in Mombasa. Now, another common feature is that most women are left to take care of their children because their husbands have become drug addicts, and the high rise of crime rates because most drug users lose their jobs, or they become unemployed, or they are unemployed, and the way that they can sustain themselves and obtain the drugs is through crime. So they can only be engaging in stealing or any other crime activities to raise the money for them to purchase drugs. Now, there's a bigger challenge in this because the problem keeps persisting. The reason being that we catch the small fish and not the big fish. There's high rate of corruption and graft. We have incidences where the police have been documented to have been escorting drugs so that they are able to transfer the drugs safely to the respective destinations. So you can see that if the police, who are supposed to be protecting people, are now involved in transporting these drugs, is this problem ever going to stop? Economic factors such as poverty also bring about this drug menace because people have no employment and they can easily purchase drugs because the drugs are cheap. And this has personally affected me, and I would like to share my story. I was born and raised in a Christian family, and I lost my father at a tender age of 6. My grandfather, who was a reverend, had started the Anglican church in my village, was my role model, and my father figure. And he continually kept, counseling us over drug abuse. And as a young girl, I never used to understand why he insisted on this drug menace, so that we should not engage in drugs. And later on, I came to understand that some of my cousins were actually abusing drugs. So we used to have this culture where every Christmas period, we would all gather together, at grandfather's home and, have a nice time over Christmas. And all this time, we always had a sermonette from my grandfather, and he kept insisting on this drug abuse issue. So at some point, my cousins deviated, and they stole from a school neighbor's farm. And this neighbor had protected his farm with paraphernalia and vowed that whoever ever stole from his farm would suffer irreversible consequences. So one of my cousins actually was involved in this, and he became mad. And I saw his father die of depression, having brought up his first boy child, grow into a young man, and succumbed to drugs. And to date, he's a mad monk. And that does not just stop there. I saw my own sister, who was married in a Christian, who had a wonderful, beautiful Christian marriage. Months after her marriage, she discovered that the husband was a drug addict, and they tried counseling, but it just didn't work. One day when she was home from work, she found all her belongings outside, and she queried what was going on because they owned their home. And she was told that the house agency had said that the tenants in that house were not paying rent. And this was the husband who had actually gone to report that to the house agency because he needed money for drugs. And so this marriage ended in a divorce. It was a painful one. And that just didn't stop there. My own brother, who only visited Mombasa for a few weeks, during the holidays, he succumbed to drugs. And I saw my mom counsel him and take him to church. They really tried as much as they could to help him reform. My brother was scary. I could hardly look at him in the eye because whenever he was under the influence of drugs, he acted weirdly, and he caused us a lot of shame with our neighbors because he would come home chanting all sorts of obscene words, and this is not a scenario you really want to be involved in. But what I like about this story is with time and a lot of counseling, my brother reformed, and today is happily married and is actually helping fellow drug addicts to reform. So at least I like that bit because spirituality really helped him to overcome. And when I was still young, I remember my own neighbor, a young girl at the age of around 7, was sent to purchase mosquito coil. Now, in Mombasa, we have the female Anopheles mosquitoes that spread malaria, and it's common for people to purchase these mosquito coils in the evening, especially when there are mosquitoes in the house. And this girl was sent by her parents to go and purchase mosquito coil so she could bring to the house and for their use. And after her purchase, on her way back, she was abducted and raped. And that meant the end of girls being sent to the shops in the evenings. So it was sad because for her family, they didn't have any son. So it meant the parents had to, visit the shops by themselves. So it was scary, and I felt enough was enough. At the age of 21, I started a mission where I would invite the street children to church, and we could speak to them because they were also being used as peddlers for drugs. And we could invite them to church together with my fellow youths, and we could counsel them so that they could stop the drug menace. And what was more painful, when I used to take them for retreats, I had to return them back to the streets, whereas I was going home to sleep in a comfortable bed. Now, my findings show that religion provides comfort and reconciliation, and it also shows that with religion, people are able to, the spirituality element helps them to overcome. You can see what happened to my brother. So one thing I've also noticed in my research, according to a study by the Columbia University, is that yes, health practitioners and psychiatrists really do know that, yes, there's an element of spirituality that can help overcome this menace. However, it's not commonly used. And for me, what I decided is that I will come up with a response mechanism, and I designed an interfaith anti-drug addiction guide where women of faith could use it to help people of different faiths. And in particular, this one, I've actually used Islam and Christianity to help drug addicts overcome the menace and help them also use their stories, for example, to help others. So I've designed this, and I would like to, under the guiding principles that all our faiths can ignite and enhance the process of recovery. I would like to quote to make two quotations from the Holy Book of Quran. O you who believe, indeed intoxicants, gambling, sacrificing on stone altars to other than Allah, and divining arrows are but defilement from the work of Satan. So avoid it that you may be successful. That is Quran 5:90. And the book of 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 8 says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. This is my message for those who would like to have a look at my guide. It's going to be available. And I believe when we look up to God, indeed we can overcome this menace. So this is my message. Look up to God. Drugs will drag us down. Indeed, we've seen that the authorities have failed. The international community may fail. However, God never fails. Thank you.